your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.
Well, hello. Welcome, horror fans. This is another edition of the Weekly Horoscope. I'm your host, Jerry, here with my partner, Matt. And Matt, this week we have quite a treat. Our topic is ghostly tales. And when I think of this topic, the first thing I think of is it's probably the deepest well that we could draw from for movies. But I also think it's the well that might contain a lot of junk. It seemed like for about a 10-year stretch, every movie was somebody moved into a new house and there were secrets in the house. And I got so sick of that general layout. But that's not what we have for you this week. What do you think of this category? And what do you think of our movies this week?
Well, one of the most powerful elements of ghostly tales is its ability to tell stories of deeply rooted trauma in families that manifest themselves over generations, which have this like nightmarish or apparition state of existence within the family as it seemingly consumes them. And this type of storytelling goes back to ancient Mesopotamia, to Shakespeare, all the way to modern tales of horror film. So I love it. This is one of my favorite genres. And I agree with you what you said as far as it's very diluted with a lot of trash, and you get sick of the same diluted derivative. A lot of ghostly tales can be very derivative with almost no meaning, a lot of jump scares. But the movies we picked for this week, I think, are a lot deeper than that.
Yeah, and I think you might attribute that to movies like Paranormal Activity that were filmed on a minuscule budget and became huge hits. And that automatically generates copycats and people trying to capture that same lightning in a bottle. But they fail to have the originality and the initiative that the first one had. You know, anything else is just going to be a copycat.
Yeah, right. Yeah, just again going back to very derivative. But again, like you said, the theme of all right, this house is haunted. We move into this new house, and then there's an issue with the house. And you started to see that a lot for a while.
The two films we have tonight. Last year, Shudder put out a special, 101 Most Horrifying Moments in Film, which was a really cool special they did. And I didn't realize this at the time, but I was rewatching that, and the two films we have tonight were both in the top 6.
Oh, nice.
So that kind of tells you the heavy hitters we brought. And I think we have an all-time classic, and we have a modern masterpiece. And we're going to start with The Shining from 1980, directed by Stanley Kubrick. And what's your initial thoughts when we listed this movie, Matt?
One thing I love about The Shining is a lot of the wide angle shots that you get. It has that Kubrick style of direction to it. It's not a typical like jump scare type like horror movie or slasher. I think a lot of the cinematography is what makes this movie so great, along with Jack Nicholson's acting, because he's such a great abusive father that he plays it too well.
Yeah.
It made me wonder watching. I was like, Jack, is everything all right?
Yeah, even when he's happy, or even when he's in a good mood early in the film, his facial expressions almost show an uneasiness underneath. Which he's done his whole career and is perfect for this film.
Right. Like he's ready to snap. You know, he's even when he's pulling his wallet out with money, and he's at this look on his face that makes it seem like he's just about to lose it, even though he's smiling.
When I rewatched this for our show here, I rewatched it in 4K, and it was the cinematography and the sound were just a sensory masterpiece. And
that's a great way to put it. Sensory masterpiece. I like that.
I remember watching this when I was a kid, and I didn't love it. And I think the nuances, the buildup of the dread that's dripping in every scene was lost on me as a kid. And I just thought, well, it's a little slow, it's a little talky, it's a little long, there's not that much action. Now, as an adult, I appreciate the overwhelming sense of impending doom that it's painted right from the beginning.
I couldn't agree more. It actually scared me when I was a child, but that the lady in the bathroom that scared me as a kid. I probably saw the movie when I was way too young. You know, I was like 10 or something like that, and I was like, "What am I watching?"
You and I did that a
Um,
lot, and same. The
yeah,
one scene
yeah,
the
yeah,
one scene that I thought was creepy was the lady in the bathtub.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, a lot of it was creepy to me from like a kid's standpoint, and then I got older and I appreciated it for being a film, like you said, a sensory masterpiece. I love how you said that. But it does that really well, even with like when Danny's like goes to scream, but there's no noise.
Hmm.
You know, just the way they and then they show and then they go right to the cut of the blood in the elevator. The way they edited and put the movie together, I thought was fantastic.
Yeah, there's so many iconic images in this, and most people know the story, so I'm gonna breeze through it pretty
Mhm.
quickly here. But right away the scenic drive up to the hotel for the interview, you get those spectacular overhead shots. You get a shot like you're a plane or a glider flying off the cliff, and then
Mhm.
you get the overhead of the hotel showing the scope of the property, which
Yeah.
is all impressive in one shot. They also talk about in the interview that in the winter of 1970, Charles Grady murdered his family and then shot himself. And when we were watching this, my wife and I looked at each other and said, "Geez, is the hotel only haunted in the off season, or is it haunted while there's guests? Because
Yeah.
there's no stories in the background about guests running away afraid of bloody
Mhm.
elevator shafts and so forth." So I don't know
That's
if
a
that
good
question's ever
observation.
answered.
Well, it's a good observation, but they also might just like to keep things in isolation, like the ghosts themselves. Maybe they just need someone to be isolated to make them lose their mind. You
Yeah.
know, if everyone's in there, if there's 150 people in there, it's like maybe the antics don't work, you know?
Yeah, it's a great point. Um, we cut to Danny, the main character, Jack's son, and his imaginary friend Tony knows that the dad got the job before the phone call even comes in, and that kind of gives you the first glimpse into Danny's shine, which is a part of the book, much more deeper than it is a part of the movie. It exists in the movie, and he communicates, telepathically with Dick Halloran,
Mhm.
but it's not the focal point of the movie by any means. The
So
madness of the father.
that's one thing that kind of eluded me. I never read the book, but when Danny's talking in that weird voice in the beginning, is that the chef? Is that the guy talking with him, or like what is that just him being a kid and having this imaginary friend? Like what is that?
The voice in his head, the shine, the things he hears, his premonitions. He's given that the name of Tony to explain it, why he has these alternate thoughts and these things come into his head that aren't his own.
Mm-hmm.
So Tony's a manifestation of his shine.
So that's it's not like other beings trying to communicate with him. It's just him,
It's just him, right?
just him. Okay, all right. That's
Right.
one thing I
And
always like wondered. Yeah.
and Dick also has the shine. So there's a scene when they're having ice cream where they do.
Later, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then the
Uh,
house itself has a shine, he says too. So
yeah.
yeah.
Um, when the family arrives and gets the tour, Danny has a vision of the twins right away, the famous twin girls in the blue dress. And something that never occurred to me before was that in the description of Charles Grady murdering his family, he had a 10 and a 12-year-old daughter, um,
Mm.
which in the book, there's only one girl. So that's another change. But so are they twins, or are they
The
similarly
10 and
sized
12.
2 years apart? I never noticed that before until I just rewatched it.
Yeah.
And everyone calls them the twins, but technically, I don't think they're twins.
Yeah, yeah, it's possible that was Grady's daughters that he murdered.
And of
And
course,
the woman in the bath could probably be the wife that was like drowned or something.
yeah, yeah, they
Yeah.
don't explain a lot. There's some imageries that are just odd and to throw you and give you that sense of unease the whole way, but
Mhm.
don't really make any sense, which is another Kubrick stylish piece. One thing I like, of course, the hotel is built on an Indian burial ground. You always got to throw that in as some
Yeah.
source of
Yeah.
this.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Um, and the funny thing is, when Doc's talking to him, he tells him to stay away from room 237, which is the famous room where all this bad stuff happens. Uh,
Hmm.
but in the book, it's room 217.
Yep.
And the hotel where they filmed at asked them to change it because they actually have a room 217. and they didn't want people to be afraid to stay in that room. So they didn't want it associated that way with the movie because they didn't have a room 237.
Oh,
And
that's interesting.
I look back on that and think, how foolish was that? Because people would be lined
You've
up for
missed a
years
a
to stay in room
marketing opportunity
217.
right there. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because you'd want to stay in 237. Yeah, you'd want to like, yes, we got like 237 to probably sell out constantly.
Yeah, you see Danny riding through the. I'm thinking, what a great place. And he mentioned he didn't have friends where he was living before. So if you don't have any friends and you're going to be isolated, what an awesome place to play. And Danny's riding his big wheel around with
Yeah.
the iconic carpet imagery, that
Yes.
carpet pattern.
Going back to
Um,
that cinematography, I loved it.
and there's a cool scene where he's riding his big wheel, and he sees the twins, and then he immediately sees them butchered, and then he sees
Yeah.
them standing there again. So his shine is showing him how they really were, which
Mhm.
was kind of a cool glimpse.
Yeah, I would have went comatose right there. And that would have been the end of me.
Yeah, and we see Jack. He's getting on edge. He blows up at Wendy a little bit. We see him starting to come a little bit unglued. We know he's an alcoholic who's been dry for 5 months or 6 months at this point, and we see him just starting to come come apart. And there's one scene where he's at his writing desk, and the room where he writes in is really beautifully staged. It's got the staircase across from it, and it's a huge open room with a giant fireplace to one side, and his
Yeah.
writing desk just kind of sits to the back of the room, and it's just this cavernous visual space that he
Yeah.
operates in.
Yeah. Just very palatial. Just this giant room that, looks like he's in a castle.
There's a scene where and this is I thought really great acting by Jack Nicholson, but he's having a nightmare, and his head is on the desk, and he's just screaming, and he's just in agony and wailing, and it's really well done. And Wendy runs in, and he tells her that he just had the worst nightmare of his life, and that he had killed his family, and not just that, he'd cut them up into little pieces. And
Mm.
it's what an awful thing to tell your wife.
Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't repeat that to anyone.
So while he's having this, Danny's actually has wandered into room 237 while this nightmare is taking place, and he comes out with a blank expression, silent, and he has marks on his neck.
Yep.
And because of the anger and the unraveling, Wendy blames Jack and calls him a bastard, and thinks that he did it, even though he wasn't anywhere near him at this time. So Jack goes into the ballroom, and as an alcoholic, he goes up to the bar and suddenly finds, the bar's not stocked. It's closed for the winter. But he suddenly finds a bartender there, Lloyd, who's ready to give him whatever he wants.
Yep. So he's not actually drinking alcohol, even though he thinks he's drinking alcohol, though, right? Like it's all just a manifestation in his mind. So like he's not actually becoming intoxicated. He just believes he is. So he's not really like relapsing, right? It's all just this manifestation that's he's portraying.
Yeah, but he embraces it. He's enjoying
Right.
it. He gets a big
Yeah.
smile on his face, and it's the
Yeah.
happiest he's seemed in a while. But yeah, it's all head games.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of head games, from this point, he goes into room 237 to see what may have happened to Danny. And there's a young, beautiful woman in the tub, and she stands up completely naked and steps out of the tub and comes towards him.
Yep.
And they embrace and start to kiss. And that's when he sees in the mirror behind him the backside of this beautiful young woman is actually old, saggy, and rotting.
And just rotting with lesions on her,
And he just repulsed, steps back, leaves the room, shuts the door, and in kind of what I thought was kind of a cool twist, he goes back to Wendy and is completely buttoned up like nothing happened, and said, no, nothing in room 237.
No.
It's all good. Like the
I'm fine.
composure
Why?
was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And she's, as he's escaping, she's cackling at him, and
Yeah.
totally
Like said,
thought it
he
was
goes
the
back to
creepiest
Wendy.
part.
He's like, "What was in room 237?" She's like, "Nothing. I didn't see anything."
No, all good. Wendy tells him that she wants to get Danny out of there, and Jack flips out on her. And the explosion of his mental state continues. And at this point, Danny reaches out to Dick Halloran, who's spending the off season in Miami, and he speaks to him via the Shine. And Dick can't get through to anybody at the hotel. They can't get anybody on the radio, so he gets on a plane to fly back to Colorado. And at this point, after the blowup, Jack goes back to the ballroom, which is now a full-blown party. It's not just one bartender serving him imaginary drinks. There's a full party going on in there. And it seems like from an era gone by.
Yeah. Like a Great Gatsby. I'm sorry. Yeah. Like very
yeah,
Great
like
Gatsby
the Roaring
type.
20s.
Roaring 20s. Yes.
Yeah. And they tell him the drinks are on the house. Your money's no good here. And that they also make an interesting line that you've always been the caretaker here, Jack.
Yeah.
And he meets a waiter named Grady. And another part I thought interesting was Grady was the name of the man who killed his family in 1970. And Jack even identifies him and tells him, hey, you're the one who killed your family and shot yourself.
Yeah, he's like, where's your wife and kids? Yeah.
But it doesn't register to them that this is odd and he shouldn't be talking to this guy.
Well, the whole ballroom experience itself should be throwing him off. Like, where did these people come from? We're all here by ourselves.
Yeah, he's abandoned reality.
Right. Which is actually an inclination to that point, that he's abandoned reality.
Yeah, and we hear, Wendy's talking to herself about leaving, and then we hear Danny talking in Tony's voice, and he's saying "Red Rum, Red Rum," and he's saying it over and over and over, and he's getting louder, and it's a little unsettling, actually, the way it's going.
Yeah. I always thought it was like is something possessing him or something. Like it kind of threw me off. But I guess like it's the Shine it's a warning, right?
Yeah, I was just gonna say almost like an overload of a warning system. And it was cool. But so Jack also destroys the radio and the snowcat, we find out. And then we kind of get to the conclusion, the famed conclusion, where which takes a while, but Wendy takes a baseball bat and is going to tell Jack that she's leaving with Danny. And she goes to the writing room, and Jack is not there, and she finds all of his pages of writing, a nice stack manuscript, and she's reading, and it all says, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
And
page after page after page.
Yeah, and like different E.E. Cummings style, like one's like a ladder and one's like one that's square, and
different page structure, paragraph structure, but that's hundreds of pages that say nothing but that. And at this point, she and us both realize he's completely gone. There's nothing there. And
it's interesting as a prop that someone had to type all those up.
Yeah. And he was using an actual typewriter, so we don't think of that nowadays, but that's a lot of work. So he appears behind her, and he's trying to be charming. Hey, what do you want to talk about? And he's got this facial expression that just is a smile, but it borders on lunacy. And he's slowly approaching her and encroaching in on her, and she's got the bat, and she starts backing up the stairs, and she's swinging half-heartedly, and she's like, stay away.
Yeah. And Jack Nicholson is just the master. I don't know. He's just so good at the stuff where he's like, give me the bat. And then like turns his like tone completely, like, give me the bat. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he just kind of goes up and down. Like, he's an incredible actor for that kind of stuff.
And then, that's perfectly in his wheelhouse. And then he has the great line where he says, I'm not going to hurt you. And then she's saying, get away. And he's like, you didn't let me finish. I said, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just going to bash your brains in. And it's just like he delivers it like with a smile on his face.
It's one of my favorite scenes of him losing his mind. Like that one scene where he's slowly walking up the steps.
Yeah. Well, and he gets close enough. She finally does clonk him with the bat, and he tumbles down the stairs, and he's out. Yeah. And she drags him all the way into the dry storage room and locks him in. So you're thinking, okay, we got a chance here.
Yeah.
When he comes to, Grady, the spirit of Grady is speaking to him through the door, and he's really egging him on, telling him, you know what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And just really getting him riled up even more than he already was.
Yeah.
And then the
Kind of
door
taunting
unlocks.
him like he failed a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then the door unlocks. And just, just craziness. He goes back to the apartment and starts axing through the door. Wendy and Danny go into the bathroom. She opens the window and slides Danny out on a giant mound of snow. But she doesn't fit through. And I'm thinking, you break that window.
Yeah. Yeah. Just, yeah.
It won't open far enough. You rip the damn thing off the track. Like,
Yeah.
you
Smash
get out that
it,
window.
pick something up and smash that. Yeah. Just get through.
Yeah. And, this is where the famous image, the famous scene that we talked about in our iconic image podcast, where he smashes through the door with the axe and sticks his face in and improvises the line, "Here's Johnny."
That's improvised. That's not in the book at all. I mean, I know there's a lot that they changed from the book, but
yeah, it was totally improvised. And in fact, the ironic part was, in the book, the character's name is Johnny, not Jack. His name's John. So that was kind of a cool throwback there. I think completely accidental. But Wendy's trapped. She does at this point take the butcher knife she has and cut his hand, and he kind of recoils. But then he hears the snowcat pulling up outside, and we know it's Dick Halloran trying to help the situation and help Danny. Danny's hiding under the kitchen cabinets, and Dick comes in to explore, and Jack comes out from behind a pillar and just buries the axe in Dick's chest.
Yeah.
So for all the heroic nature that Dick showed, he was met with a swift end, unfortunately.
Yeah, I always wondered why he went on vacation and didn't choose to stay there and maybe help keep an eye on things, or maybe stay close. Like, hey, this young kid has The Shining. This house is haunted. Like, maybe I should keep tabs on them and not go anywhere. Like, well, he just takes off.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you got to imagine, this is 1980. They've had a caretaker work successfully for the last 10 years. Is it really his job? But he did seem to care about Danny. So I get your point. That totally makes sense.
Yeah. But it's also, I mean, that's just it's the plot device. They have to put it in there.
Yeah. So hearing Dick get killed, Danny runs out and takes off outside the door into the snow. And at this point, Wendy starts seeing spirits. She starts seeing the ghost, including two men in a hotel room, and one's in a bear suit on his knees in front of the other one.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, what the heck is
this? That's disturbing imagery. But I've read somewhere that was kind of like alluding to the sexual abuse between maybe the father and Danny. Like, maybe they're alluding to that there was some kind of sexual abuse. Like, the guy in the tuxedo is the dad, and the little costume. I don't know. I don't know how that makes sense, but I didn't read the book. But
it's just weird.
Or it's just disturbing. Yeah.
Yeah. Just weird and disturbing. Yeah. It could have a deep meaning, particularly with Kubrick, but who knows? And there's, Jack had chased Danny out the door, and there's these beautiful tracking shots as Danny runs into the hedges, and the camera's behind him, and it's dark, but there's lights in the hedges, and it's just the snow on the ground. It's just beautiful shots, just really well done.
Yeah.
And Jack is chasing him with the axe. And at one point, Danny gets really smart because he's following his footprints in the snow. He perfectly back steps through his own footprints and then ducks under a hedge into a different row. And Jack gets completely lost because he's unable to follow the steps anymore.
Yeah.
And Wendy at this point comes out the front door. Danny comes out the hedge, and they are reunited. And they get in Dick's snowcat, and they leave. And we cut to an image the next morning of Jack completely frozen to death. And then
another famous image. Yeah, this movie's filled with famous imagery. Yeah.
And then we cut to there was a wall of pictures outside the ballroom, and there was a scrapbook of pictures that played a more prominent role in the book. But this was kind of the fill-in, the pictures on the wall in the ballroom.
Oh, okay.
And they zoom in to a party from 1921 in the ballroom, and Jack, or the image that appears to be Jack, is front and center in the photo.
Yeah.
Kind of a throwback to the, you've always been the caretaker here. And
Right. And that always left me like with questions. Like, is it like a reincarnate? Is he a reincarnation? Was this? But yeah, they don't tell you at all.
questions not answered, but
Yeah.
just an incredibly well done movie. Again, it's probably on the Mount Rushmore of all time horror movies.
Absolutely.
And certainly in this category of ghostly tales, one of the very, very best. Really, really.
Like just, oh, I was gonna say, like, just like so many of the scenes have just been I don't want to say like copied, but like paid homage to the Shining. Like even like the bathroom scene. I thought of that when I saw Inside 2007. Like when she's like, that I immediately think of The Shining when you see a scene like that.
Yeah, it's integrated pop culture in so many different ways.
Yeah.
The twins and
Yep.
which is a sign of a great movie where everyone recognizes it. And even people who've never seen the movie, if you saw Jack Nicholson's head and said, "Here's Johnny," they know what it's from.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll jump forward a little bit, but like in Hereditary, there's the scene where she's sleepwalking and she opens her mouth to scream and there's no noise. It goes right back to like when Danny does that in this movie. You know what I mean? Like there's just so much that it's influenced.
Yeah, great film. Our next movie that Matt alluded to is Hereditary from 2018, directed by Ari Aster in his directorial debut. And man, what a debut, Matt. What do you think of this film?
Absolutely. This movie is filled with a lot of disturbing imagery, and it does it masterfully. I don't know if I would consider this movie. It doesn't like scare me so much as it's very disturbing to watch. It also just it's very layered with meaning, and a lot of that meaning is you have to kind of put it together. They don't just say things outright in this movie, which is what I really like.
Yeah, I got to be honest. The first time I watched it, I thought it was amazing. I thought it was an unbelievable sense of dread and building. It's a kind of a slow burn. But there were parts I was scratching my head that I didn't completely grasp until I rewatched it and maybe got in a little deeper.
Agreed. And I don't know. I feel like a slow burn movie, when people say that, it gets a bad rep. I actually enjoy a good slow burn sometimes. I don't need everything thrusted at once. It's like take the time to build the layers, get some character development. Like I feel like that's a good thing. I don't mind a slow burn movie. I like a good slow burn movie. It can be very impactful when they do it that way, the right way.
Yeah, definitely. This movie starts with the death of Ellen, who's 78 years old, and we start by knowing her family. Annie is her daughter, who has a husband, Steve, a son, Peter, and a daughter, Charlie. And Annie, which is Toni Collette, which we'll talk about later, is a miniature artist, and they start by showing these miniature room setups and then panning into the room and having it become the real room, which I immediately thought established a sense of uneasiness. What is reality?
Yep.
I thought they did that wonderfully.
That opening shot where it starts off as the house and then goes right into the actual scene. I immediately go, "Oh, this is going to be a good movie." Like,
just really
that's a quality shot. It's just a quality, well done shot. You're like, "Oh, we're in for something."
Yeah. Makes you just question what's reality in this movie.
Exactly.
At Ellen's funeral, there's a bunch of people that Annie doesn't know, and when going through her things, she finds a book on spiritualism, and it's got a note in it to Annie. And then she sees the shadow of her mother in the corner. And this is kind of exactly what you're talking about. It's just creepy. Like she's not attacking her. It's just a shadow.
There's no jump scare. Right. It actually makes you squint and look at, well, I did at least. I squinted. I was like, wait, is that what I think I'm seeing? And then it's just like the light comes on. You're like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She flicks the light.
Disturbing imagery like that.
Yeah. Flicks the light and there's nothing there. It's really well done. And at grief counseling, Annie reveals that they were pretty much estranged until Charlie was born, and that her mom came back in and was very prominent raising Charlie. And Charlie wants her grandmother and is behaving a little bit oddly. And she makes this weird clicking sound very often.
Like a cluck.
Yeah, it's just a weird noise. The sound design in this movie, I think, is very, very well done and adds to the dread at many levels.
Yeah, it has this almost, it's reminiscent to me of like hearing one drop of water into a bucket.
Yeah.
Just yeah.
Yep, very, very true. There's a weird scene where a bird flies into the window at her school, and she goes out after school with her school scissors and snips its head off. And she's having visions. We
So
hear Stephen get a call that Ellen's grave was desecrated, but he doesn't share this with Annie or the rest of the family. And then 16-year-old Peter wants to go to a party, and Annie makes him take Charlie with him.
which to me was bizarre. If I like, she's like, "Oh, is there going to be alcohol there?" He's like, "No." So she knows it's a high school party, and she's like, "Take your little daughter, like take your little sister." Like, I thought that was really, really bizarre.
Yeah, he's 16, and she actually asked, "Well, are you going to be drinking?" So yeah, to force a 13-year-old into that environment seemed odd too. Yeah.
I get this impression in the first act of the movie that, oh, this is a weird kid movie. They have this weird, like the weird creepy kid. It almost seems like it's gonna be a creepy kid movie.
Yeah, the actress that plays Charlie has some cranial deformation disease, so she has a bit of an odd look to her. Her head's a little skewed to the side, but she's fantastic. She's really, really good.
Yeah, everyone is.
That's true. Yeah. So at the party, Peter leaves Charlie to go smoke pot with some girls, and she eats a piece of cake that was cut with a knife that was just used to chop walnuts, and she has a severe nut allergy. So she goes and grabs Peter, and she's going into anaphylactic shock. So Peter grabs her, runs out of the party, puts her in the back of the car, and takes off, driving like crazy, going to the hospital. And this is probably the most famous scene of the movie. And no matter who you watch it with, even if they've seen it before, this will draw ooh out of the crowd for sure.
Don't see it coming.
Charlie puts her head out of the window to help herself breathe.
Yep.
And Peter swerves to avoid a dead deer in the road, and Charlie is decapitated by a telephone pole. It just happens to have an occult sigil carved into the pole. But that scene is it's awful, it's gruesome, but it's so well done. Peter just sits in the car in shock, and you can see him sweating. You can see his eyes are glazed over.
Yeah.
And
it's because he's stoned, Jerry.
Well, that might be part of it. I guess you shouldn't drive stoned.
Yeah.
But he proceeds to do maybe the simplest thing, but maybe the most shocking thing. He drives home, parks the car, and goes and gets in bed.
Truly in shock. It's immediate PTSD.
And another, what I thought was a phenomenal scene. We show him in bed. It's morning. The camera stays right on his face. He's got a great look on his face. It's agony. It's bewilderment because he knows what's happening. And we hear the parents downstairs getting ready for the day. And we hear the mother's going to run an errand. And then we hear Toni Collette screaming, wailing, crying, the most agonizing sound you could imagine as she discovers what's in the car.
Yeah. And one of the biggest tragedies is that she did not win an Oscar for this movie.
Yeah, I have that in my notes. It is, maybe I could live with her not winning it, but she wasn't even nominated.
She wasn't even nominated. I think, like, I looked at the nominees for that year. I was like, Margaret Robbie. Like, I don't know. I don't understand. Maybe it's because you don't get a lot of like horror movies that are nominated for Oscars. I couldn't figure it out.
That's exactly what I attributed it to, is just these blinders when it comes to horrific movies. And I'll compare it to one of my favorite movies of all time, Silence of the Lambs, in which Jodie Foster did win the Academy Award, which was mind-blowing. But I'm sorry, I love that movie and I love Jodie Foster. This was better. The range of emotion
leaps and bounds
Toni Collette had to show she was awesome.
Up and down the spectrum, and she did it perfectly. Like it,
Yeah.
What they had to have her do for every range of motion, like you said, and she's just the star. It's amazing.
Yeah, she's great for sure. And then we think this awful scene is over. We're still on Peter's face as he's absorbing his mother's screams from a distance, and then we quick cut to the severed head laying in the middle of the desert road with ants crawling all over it.
Yeah, another disturbing imagery. Yeah, because they
It's
actually
just,
show you the head. Yeah, they show you the decapitated head of the girl. It's just,
and I feel like it takes a few minutes to recover from what you just saw before you can move forward in the story. Like you almost want to pause it and sit there for 5 minutes and collect your thoughts
yeah,
because
like
it's unbelievable.
when you read something really deep in a book and you have to put the book down and think about it for a second. Yeah,
It was that powerful and impactful.
yeah. You're like, wait, we're only in the first act of the movie. I did not see that coming. Like,
right. Andy meets a woman named Joan at grief counseling and offers to talk to her one-on-one about grief. Peter is starting to have visions, and Annie decides she's making a miniature of the accident, and her miniatures are unbelievably detailed and so precise.
yeah,
And she's making the accident, including the severed head sitting in the road.
yeah,
And Stephen, her husband, is a psychiatrist, and he's really starting to worry about her sanity. And
yeah.
Annie and Peter have a huge blow up at dinner over everything
Yeah,
that happened and everything that
yeah.
was left unsaid.
Yeah, in her mind, she's like, well, it's not like I'm implying it was anyone's fault by making this. I'm just trying to deal with it, and this is how I deal. I'm dealing with it through my art.
Yeah.
So she's like justifying it. Like,
I get his perspective. It's not the kind of thing you want to just immerse
right.
yourself in as an artist.
Yeah,
I wouldn't think.
yeah. Another complicated layer to this movie.
Yeah,
is dealing with the haunting of the reveries of our past, and that theme I think comes up a lot throughout this movie.
Yeah, the family dynamic, the legacy of generations, and the grief, the loss. There's so many layers to this. It's really staggering.
Yeah, the generations of nightmarish states of existence within our family and how they consume us.
Annie happens to randomly run into Joan again, which at this point you don't believe it's random at all. And she convinces her that she's got a solution to the grief and to come to her house for a seance. And she does, unbelievably, and things start to happen, and she freaks out and leaves.
Yeah.
She's like,
it's
I can't
too much
do this.
for, yeah.
On the way out the door, Joan luckily has written instructions to give to her so that she could attempt to do this on her own.
Yeah.
Which you just started to say, this really looks like a setup.
She's processing all of this. Like, she can't even believe it. She just puts it in her hand. She's like, just take it and go. And she's like, she's distraught from what she just saw. She still hasn't dealt with the death of her daughter. She doesn't really know how to handle it. She's reaching out to someone who's showing her like a seance. She's kind of freaked out. She's all over the place. And her acting is just incredible.
And of course, in the car on the way home, she's completely distraught and unnerved by what just happened. She hears Charlie's click behind her.
Yeah.
In the car, and of course, she turns around. There's nothing there, but that click is just now. Every time you hear it, it also adds to the dread.
Yeah, and well, I think they use that as like a Pavlovian thing when you start associating that sound with dread.
Yeah, it works.
Yeah, it's smart. It's a very
Annie
smart
has
device.
this awful dream where Peter is dead and covered in bugs. But then he wakes up and she tells him that she never wanted to be his mother. She never wanted him. And
she tried to have an abortion. Yeah.
She's like, why do you hate me? It's like this awful exchange. And then suddenly they're both all wet. And then they all both, are engulfed in flames. And then Annie wakes up. So after waking up from this awful dream, she decides in the middle of the night she's going to wake up Stephen and Peter, and she's going to do the seance.
Yeah. So she's frantic.
Yeah. She's completely manic. And they're both like, what are you talking about? None of this makes sense. And they don't want to do it. But she finally convinces them. And glass breaks and the candles light themselves and flame up. And then Charlie's voice speaks through the mom. And it's, Peter's coming completely unglued until Stephen throws water in her face and she comes back to herself.
She's like, what did you do that for? Yeah.
Yeah. How was it going? Like, she wasn't there at all.
Yeah.
And
the son's crying. And I noticed he cries a lot, and he acts very pre-adolescent for someone his age throughout this movie, which would make sense towards the end. But
yeah. At one point, there's a light orb that follows him into classroom and kind of seems to go into him.
Yeah.
And then he turns and looks at his reflection in the glass, and he's got a real down expression. He's been in a state of depression since his sister died.
Yep.
But his expression his reflection is grinning from ear to ear.
Just a sinister grin. Yeah.
Yeah. It's and then we see back at the home, Charlie's drawing books have drawings being created in them with no hand writing them. Just a pencil in the air filling out these books. And that's kind of creepy.
Yeah.
And that night she appears in Peter's room. Peter's going through nothing's going right for this poor kid. He sees her image in his room, and then her head falls off and rolls towards him.
Which is that childish, like when you're a kid and like you wake up in the night and like you think like your chair with the shirt on it is something. You're like, you know what I mean? Like when you're like 8 years old, it kind of played into that. Like there she is in the dark corner, but always just a ball that rolled forward. But so it's like playing with his head.
Yeah. Back at school the next day, Joan is there across the street, and she's yelling incantations at Peter, basically trying to get his soul to free up his body, which it's just uneasy. It's weird. Meanwhile, Annie's going through her mother's things, which she didn't really go through them much the first time. And now she finds she's digging deeper, and that her mother was the queen of a coven, and that Joan was one of her disciples. Mm-hmm. And they worship the demon king Paimon, who needs a male body to host it.
And it says there that it has to be the most vulnerable of the group. So the male has to be the most vulnerable, which is why it starts to make sense why he's doing all this annoying crying throughout the movie and just acting real childish. So I was like, oh, okay, so he was the most vulnerable. So they built that character into it.
Yeah. At this point, Annie goes up into the attic. Then there's bugs, there's flies and everything flying all over, and finds her mom's headless body in the corner of the attic with occult symbols drawn all around it on the wall. And it's like, holy crap, how'd your headless mother get into your attic?
Yeah.
Back at class, Peter keeps hearing Charlie's click, and then his face, you can see him be taken over. Yeah. His face distorts, his head becomes a little bit misshapen, kind of like Charlie's.
Yep.
And then he just smashes his face into the desk hard and repeatedly.
Like smushed, like something was holding his head there.
Yeah, just nuts. And
you
then
see his nose smushed right into the table and his lips, and he's just like can tell it's against his own will.
Of course, the class is looking at him like, "What the heck is happening here?" And then he jumps back and screams, almost like he's back. He's back in his own body.
Yeah, he's just screaming frantically.
It's crazy. Back at home, Stephen picks up Peter from the doctor's, brings him home. Annie makes Stephen look in the attic, and he doesn't believe her, of course, but he goes up there and he comes down and immediately accuses her of putting the body there. And she tells him that you have to burn this book. Previously, she threw it into the fire, the book where where Charlie's drawings were. And when she threw it into the fire, she immediately caught fire. So she had to pull it out.
And she tells him that she's like, you have to be the one that does this. I can't do it. I'm connected to this book. I've made this mistake by bringing this into our house, and you need to be the one that destroys this and help. And he's like, he's just had enough. Yeah. And
he doesn't believe anything she's saying at this point, but she's like, you got to do it. I can't, I can't kill myself. I need your help. And they get to the fire and he won't do it. So she just flings it in there. And in a twist, Stephen bursts into flames, and not
Instantly,
just a little.
yeah, no, he burst into flames.
And yeah, he just completely cooks. Annie screams, and then her face goes completely blank. And it feels like at this point she is now possessed with something.
Yeah.
Peter wakes up, and this is another great scene. Peter wakes up, and we kind of get a wide shot of his bedroom, and he's in bed, and he comes to. And if you're not looking for it, your attention is drawn on him, and there's a little moonlight coming in through the window. If you're not looking for it, you don't notice there's a figure up in the corner attached to the wall and ceiling hovering over him.
Yeah.
And it's so creepy, and it's just sitting there. And he gets up, he never sees it, and then we see it skitter down the wall and go out into the hallway. And it's just a super creepy.
And
shot.
it's the mom.
Yeah. We find out it was the mom. Peter walks out and sees the dad burnt, and the mom is hovering in the corner, following him again. She's way up on the top of the ceiling. It's just, she's kind of like a spider perched there. It's really creepy done. There starts to be naked people walking into his house.
Yeah, I thought that was even creepier. Like when he right over, in the background.
Yeah,
it's like this a figure. It looks like it's almost like those things from The Descent. It's just like naked, pale, like in the shadows, just like with this big giant smile, and it's like what? It's just like a still shot for like a minute that you just like, what is going on here?
You put yourself in the mind of this 16-year-old who's already completely wrecked, and he's looking at the burnt body of his father, and then strange, pale, naked people start walking into his room, and then to top it all off, his mother drops down from hovering on the ceiling somehow and chases him up into the attic.
Yeah.
And he shuts the door and locks it. And at the top of the stairs against the attic door, she starts banging her head impossibly fast on the door. Like, all I could think of was like a woodpecker.
Yeah. Just that was insane.
Clearly not a human action.
Because they don't show that at first. You just hear it sounds like knocking, and you're like, oh, she's banging on the door, and then they cut back to the scene, and she's using her head, and you're just like, another disturbing piece. You're just like, what?
Yeah, it's crazy. Once they show the scene in the attic, it's kind of set up like a ceremony, and out of the shadows walk more naked people. There's naked people all around.
And the grandmother's body is missing, and it's the picture of him with his eyes cut out, where the grandmother's body was.
Yeah. And now Annie's up in the attic, hovering in the corner. She likes the corners for some reason. And we see her sawing her own head off with piano wire.
This is one of the most, this very scene stuck with me more than any other scene in the entire movie. It's because of the eye contact she makes. She's cutting her own head off and looking down at him with no emotion.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but the way that was done was so harrowing and just so like, I was speechless. I was like, what was that? Like, and then they zoom in on her eyes, and it's just like this dead look, but she's looking right at him. Yeah. It's just so creepy.
Yeah, it was very, very creepy. Peter does the most sensible thing at this point and just dives out the window, falling to the ground and perhaps to his death.
Things are bad when that's the most sensible thing to do.
Right. At that point, like, that seemed like the most sensible thing to do.
Yeah.
He's perhaps dead at this point, but an orb of light enters his body, and he reanimates. And he sees the treehouse was kind of a central figure. Charlie used to sleep in there, and when Annie was dealing with a lot of her grief, she would spend the night in there. And so now it's all lit up, and we see Annie's headless body floating up through the bottom. And he follows her up, and he doesn't have really an expression on his face.
Yep.
And when he gets in there, Joan and other members of the coven are bowing to an idol created with Charlie's severed head. And it includes the headless mom and grandma bowing, which is really creepy to see somebody with no head down in that position.
Yeah, it was very weird.
And Joan places the crown on Peter's head, as the proper male host, he is celebrated as King Paimon, one of
Yeah.
the 8 kings of hell.
Yeah,
And
and they're saying that they're here to worship him.
yep, and that's the end of the movie. And it's one of those where it shuts off and you're sitting there just staring at the screen for a few minutes going, what did I just see?
What did I just see? Yeah. Yeah. It's really it's very deranged movie. Because there's no happy ending. You know, things just get worse and worse and worse, and up until the end where this entire family's destroyed. And it's not only is it destroyed, it's destroyed by the grandmother who sacrifices her entire family to this.
Yeah, it's again, it took a couple watches for me to start piecing some of the things together.
Yeah.
Before I totally understood the narrative, it was a string of beautiful and dreadful set pieces that
Yeah.
didn't make a coherent story to me.
Yeah.
And it was even more dreadful and even a greater movie once I put the narrative together.
I agree 100%. Like, yeah, the first time I saw it, I actually loved it the first time I saw it because I remember when it came out, it was very dividing. There was a lot of people that loved it, and there was a lot of people that like, what was that? That was terrible. I didn't like that movie. And I was like, oh, it's a pretty divisive movie. I didn't, this will be interesting. And I saw it, and I was like, the people who didn't like it, what were they watching? Like, I was so confused. I was like, that movie was incredible. Like,
Yeah.
I liked it right away. But then the second time I saw it, when we recently just this past week, I liked it even more. I was just
Yeah.
like, this was like really well done.
Yeah, I think I've seen it 3 times, and each time I've gained a greater appreciation for some of the nuance, and
The perspectives that they put in there, like nuance, like you said. Yeah,
it really builds up very, very well. And in fact, I mentioned the Shudder special, the 101 most horrific images in film, and this was third. You know,
wow.
this movie was third. It was
Deservedly so. It has incredibly good cinematography, really good sound, incredibly good acting. Interesting story. It's very deep with you know, the inability to map emotional terrain of experiences you've had in the past with your family, you know, and how that can leave you vulnerable. And I know that's like looking deep into it, but I mean, there's just a lot of layer to it.
Yeah, I was struck by it. Was surrounded by Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Thing, Audition, The Shining, The Exorcist, and it's like this
Yeah.
4-year-old movie is so esteemed that it was in that company, which I thought was a real testament to how great this movie is, and gets better
Right.
upon multiple viewings. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to seeing it again, you know, shortly in the future. Maybe I'll give it a couple months and I'll revisit it again. You know, it's fun to do that when you can find new meanings in movies. Or just things you didn't, you know, things you didn't really pick up on, like very small, subtle things, like when he sees his sister in the room, and it just the ball just falls forward, like that's her decapitation, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what that represents. Yeah, and they just do a lot of things like that in the movie that are well done.
Yeah, totally agree. So this is our episode of Ghostly Tales, and we brought a couple heavy hitters to this
Yeah.
party for sure. Really, I loved watching these movies. It was great to revisit them,
Especially back to back with such a similar, you know.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I'm like, this is kind of a modern version of this, and both are just super. Yeah. Well, that's our show for this week. Next week, we are going to be talking about franchise frenzy, and our concept is to take some of the craziest entries into classic franchises and kind of deal with them. So that's going to be maybe not the extreme quality level of the films we talked about this week, but still a lot of fun.
Different tone, but just as much fun.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, thank you for listening. This is the Weekly Horoscope. I'm Jerry. That's my partner, Matt, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right, thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jerry.
Your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.